Located on the southwest coast of Wales, where the sea mist rolls gently over dunes and pine trees sway in the salt-laced wind, Pembrey Forest appears at first glance to be a place of rare peace. A landscape painted in soft greens and silvers where families picnic, hikers wander marked trails, and photographers wait patiently for the perfect golden sunset. Yet beneath that quiet beauty lies a history shadowed by shipwrecks, sudden storms, wartime tragedies, and whispered stories of people who stepped off the path and were never quite the same again. For decades, locals have spoken carefully about the forest after dark, about how the atmosphere shifts when the sun dips below the horizon and the birds fall silent all at once, as if responding to an unseen signal, and how the wind that once felt gentle begins to move with intention, threading itself between the trees in long, low breaths that sound almost like distant voices. It was on an autumn evening that a small group of visitors, drawn by curiosity and the promise of capturing authentic paranormal evidence, entered the forest long after the gates were meant to close, laughing off the warnings they had read online, confident that superstition would crumble under the light of their cameras and recording devices. Among them was Daniel, a documentary filmmaker eager to build his channel, Sarah, a history graduate fascinated by coastal folklore, and two friends who treated the entire expedition as a harmless thrill. At first, everything unfolded predictably. The crunch of gravel under boots, the beam of flashlights cutting clean white tunnels through the darkness, the distant hush of waves breaking beyond the dunes. But then, without warning, their equipment began to fail in small, irritating ways, batteries draining far faster than expected, microphones picking up static that pulsed in uneven rhythms, and a coldness settling. Pulsed in uneven rhythms, and a coldness settling over the clearing they had chosen, sharp enough to sting their lungs. Sarah was the first to notice the smell, a faint metallic tang like rust or wet iron, drifting through the air even though there were no visible sources nearby, and when she mentioned it the others dismissed her concern until Daniel replayed a snippet of recorded audio and heard, layered beneath their casual conversation, a whisper too clear to be wind and too deliberate to be random noise, a whisper that seemed to shape a single word: stay. What followed was not dramatic in the cinematic sense but deeply unsettling in its subtlety. As the forest began to feel crowded despite the absence of any visible figures, branches snapping somewhere beyond the reach of their lights, footsteps that matched their pace from a parallel direction, and once, unmistakably, the sound of someone exhaling directly behind Daniel's shoulder. He spun around, heart hammering, only to find empty darkness. Determined not to abandon the chute, he urged the group deeper along a narrow path that curved toward a section of older pines rarely visited by daytime tourists, and it was there that they discovered something that did not belong. A patch of disturbed earth shaped almost like a shallow grave, though no marker stood above it, only a crude arrangement of driftwood pressed into a rough symbol none of them recognized. The air seemed heavier there, pressing against their chests, and Sarah felt an overwhelming wave of sorrow that did not feel entirely her own, images flickering in her mind of storm-tossed ships and desperate cries swallowed by black water, as if the tragedies of the shoreline had seeped inland and rooted themselves among the trees. When one of the friends attempted to joke about buried treasure, the forest responded with a violent gust that knocked his hat clean off his head and extinguished two flashlights at once, plunging them into near total darkness. In that moment, the joking stopped. They decided to retreat, yet the path behind them no longer appeared as they remembered it, the trail markers absent, the familiar fork replaced by an unbroken wall of shadow, and though they tried to rely on GPS, their phones showed only a frozen map with no signal bars. Panic crept in slowly, insidious and contagious, and as they argued about direction, a figure emerged at the edge of their vision. Tall, indistinct, more absence than presence, standing between two trees as though observing them with patient interest. When Daniel raised his camera, the screen flickered, distorting the image into streaks of gray before cutting out entirely, and when the light returned, the figure was gone, leaving behind only the echo of movement and the sense that something had drawn closer. They walked for what felt like hours in looping circles, each step carrying them deeper rather than outward, until finally they stumbled into a clearing that none of them recognized, where the trees leaned inward in a rough ring and the temperature dropped so sharply that their breath fogged in thick white clouds. There, in the center, stood another symbol etched into the soil, more deliberate than the first, lines carved with care as though by someone who had returned repeatedly to maintain Sarah felt compelled to step forward, whispering that she could hear voices layered beneath the wind, overlapping pleas and fragments of prayers, and before the others could stop her she knelt beside the carving, pressing her palm against the cold earth as if responding to an invitation. And in that instant the forest seemed to exhale in unison, a long, hollow sigh that vibrated through the ground beneath them. Daniel would later claim that time fractured in that clearing, stretching and folding in ways that defied logic, because although his watch suggested only minutes had passed, each second felt elongated, saturated with a presence that was neither entirely hostile nor merciful, simply aware, intensely aware of their intrusion. Sarah's expression shifted from curiosity to something distant, her eyes unfocused as though she were watching scenes invisible to the others, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a tone layered with echoes, repeating words in a cadence that did not belong to her. They called for help, and no one came. The wind intensified, circling them in tightening currents, lifting pine needles into spirals that scratched against their jackets, and the friends who had once laughed now pleaded to leave, but every direction beyond the clearing appeared identical, dense with trees that seemed to lean subtly inward as if sealing the perimeter. Daniel forced his camera back to life, determined to document whatever was unfolding, and though the lens captured only darkness to the naked eye, the playback later revealed fleeting silhouettes moving between trunks, shapes that flickered in and out of visibility like memories struggling to remain intact. One frame, frozen and enhanced, showed what resembled a line of figures standing shoulder to shoulder at the forest's edge, heads bowed, clothing indistinct yet suggestive of another era. Sarah began describing sensations she insisted were not imagination. The weight of water filling lungs, the sting of salt in open wounds, the terror of calling out across a storm-ridden shoreline and receiving nothing in return. And as she spoke, Daniel realized the tragedies of the coast were not isolated to the sea but woven into the land itself, as though grief had migrated inland and anchored within the roots of. Continuing its steady rhythm, distant lights glowing from nearby houses, no sign that anything extraordinary had transpired beyond the tree line. Authorities later searched extensively but found no trace of the vanished friend. No footprints leading away, no discarded belongings, nothing to confirm or deny what the survivors described. The footage Daniel recovered became the backbone of a documentary that would ignite fierce debate, skeptics attributing the anomalies to stress, equipment malfunction, and mass suggestion, believers pointing to the layered whispers and shadowed forms as undeniable proof that the forest guards more than soil and timber. Sarah never fully returned to her former self, claiming in interviews that the voices have softened but not disappeared, that on certain nights when the wind moves just right she can still hear fragments of pleas carried inland from the restless sea, and Daniel refuses to revisit the site after sunset, acknowledging that whatever presence resides within those trees did not seek random violence but demanded acknowledgement, remembrance for those lost to sudden and severe tragedy along the Welsh shore. And so the legend endures, passed from locals to visitors in cautious tones, a reminder that some landscapes are not merely scenic backdrops but living archives of human sorrow, where the boundary between past and present thins after dark, and where those who wander too confidently may discover that beauty can coexist with something far older, far deeper, and far less willing to be ignored.